Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're undertaking a seriously fascinating multidisciplinary journey. We are going to look at the single most documented, intensely debated, and quite literally world-altering 24 hours in human history, the final day of Jesus of Nazareth. And we're not just reading ancient texts here. We are bringing together historical accounts, stunning archaeological discoveries, and modern medical science to do a complete hour-by-hour breakdown of these final moments. Get ready, because mapping this out visually absolutely changes how you understand the sheer scale of what happened that day. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda. We'll be moving chronologically through 6 stages. Sunset for the Last Supper, midnight betrayal in Gethsemane, the pre-dawn Jewish trial, morning Roman condemnation, midday on the Via Dolorosa, and finally the afternoon crucifixion and death.
Section 1. Sunset. The Last Supper.
So, we're kicking off our timeline right around 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening. We're leaving the chaotic, crowded streets of Passover in Jerusalem and stepping into the quiet, highly intimate setting of the upper room with Jesus and his 12 closest disciples. Notice how rapidly this sequence of events is going to unfold. In literally just one rotation of the earth, an entire religious and political landscape is going to be completely turned upside down. During this meal, some deeply symbolic things happen. Jesus actually takes off his outer clothes and wraps a towel around his waist. Now, historically speaking, this was strictly the uniform of a slave. By adopting this lowly status just to wash his disciples' feet, he was completely shocking his friends and setting this profound example of servant leadership. Then, acting as the host, he blesses and breaks the unleavened bread. But, and here is the major pivot, instead of just repeating the traditional Exodus story about freedom from Egypt, he makes a radical shift. He recenters the entire Passover narrative around himself, telling them that this broken bread represents his own body, directly foreshadowing the sacrifice that's coming.
Section 2. Midnight. Betrayal in Gethsemane.
Pushing our timeline forward, we step out of the upper room and into the dark. It's approaching midnight, and we're at the Mount of Olives, specifically in a garden called Gethsemane. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern medicine actually illuminates an ancient text. The physician Luke recorded that Jesus was in such immense anguish that his sweat became like drops of blood. Well, clinically, this is a real thing. It's defined as hematidrosis. It's a rare but thoroughly documented medical condition. When someone is under extreme, agonizing emotional stress, the tiny capillary blood vessels feeding the sweat glands can literally rupture, causing blood to exude right along with the sweat. This grounds the immense emotional trauma of that midnight hour in stark medical reality. Plus, it meant his skin would have been incredibly fragile and tender for everything that was about to follow.
And you know, that trauma is instantly compounded by betrayal. Judas Iscariot arranged to hand Jesus over to the authorities for 30 pieces of silver, identifying him in the dark garden with a greeting kiss. Scholars actually debate the name Iscariot. Some theorize it comes from an Aramaic term meaning the false one. Others suggest it stems from a word meaning chokiness or constriction, which is a chilling, posthumous nickname that completely foreshadows his ultimate suicide by hanging. Overcome by this sudden, crushing remorse, Judas tries to give the blood money back, and history records his tragic end in what became known as Akeldama, or the Field of Blood.
Section 3. Pre-dawn. The Jewish trial. Jesus is arrested, and we shift into the pre-dawn hours of Friday. Most of Jerusalem is sound asleep, but inside the high priestly compounds, a rapid-fire sequence of political and religious maneuvering is just kicking off. Jesus is brought before Caiaphas, the high priest. Now, for the longest time, Caiaphas was just a name in ancient manuscripts, until 1990. During some construction work in the Peace Forest of Jerusalem, archaeologists actually discovered a first-century tomb. Inside, they found a stunningly ornate limestone bone box, an ossuary, inscribed with the name Caiaphas, containing the remains of a 60-year-old man. This physical artifact is huge. It reveals the immense wealth and undeniable historical reality of the man who ran Jesus' religious trial. And this brilliantly illustrates the intricacies of ancient legal systems. The Jewish trial, led by Caiaphas in the middle of the night, operated strictly within a religious framework. The charge they ultimately pinned on him was blasphemy, claiming to be the Son of God. But here's the catch. Under the strict rules of Roman occupation, the Jewish Sanhedrin didn't have the legal authority to execute a prisoner. So, as the sun comes up, they are forced to pivot.
They hand Jesus over to the Roman legal system, officially changing the charge from an internal religious dispute to a massive political threat: treason and sedition against the emperor.
Section 4. Mourning. The Roman condemnation.
This brings us to daybreak, introducing the Roman governor of Judea into our timeline, Pontius Pilate. Now, to understand this morning trial, you really have to understand Pilate. A contemporary of his, the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, described Pilate as a man of a very inflexible disposition and very merciless as well as very obstinate. Pilate was basically an iron-fisted ruler focused on one thing: protecting his own reputation with Emperor Tiberius. He couldn't have cared less about a localized religious dispute. His personal dilemma was simply crushing any potential riot and maintaining absolute Roman order. And just like with Caiaphas, Pilate's footprint has literally been dug out of the dust. In 1961, archaeologists at Caesarea Maritima found the Pilate stone. It's a reused limestone block dedicating a building to Tiberius Caesar. And the inscription clearly reads, Pontius Pilate, Prefect of Judea. This was a game changer because it corrected later historians who mistakenly called him a procurator. This stone confirms his exact historical title and his absolute authority to issue that fatal order of condemnation on Friday morning.
Section 5. Midday. The Via Dolorosa. With the condemnation issued, we hit midday. And this brings up some severe logistical nightmares for the Romans. How do you move a condemned, heavily guarded man through a city that is absolutely packed with Passover pilgrims? This path becomes forever remembered as the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of Sorrow. Let's move to and see how this builds historically. Modern models suggest a much different route than the traditional medieval path. Jesus was likely tried by Pilate at the Praetorium, which was Herod's old palace on the western side of the city. From that gate of judgment, it was a much more direct, though completely agonizing route out of the city gates to Golgotha. The Romans were highly practical. They wouldn't parade a volatile prisoner through the streets any further than absolutely necessary. And part of that brutal practicality involved the instrument of death itself. The condemned generally didn't carry the entire cross. That whole thing weighed well over 300 pounds. Instead, they carried the patibulum, which is the horizontal crossbar. But even so, this solid piece of wood weighed anywhere from 75 to 125 pounds. Because of the severe trauma Jesus had already endured overnight, the Romans eventually grabbed a bystander out of the crowd, a man named Simon of Cyrene. Just imagine the pure shock of being pulled out of a festive Passover crowd and suddenly being forced to carry this heavy, blood-stained beam just to make sure the victim wouldn't die before they even reached the execution site.
Section 6. Afternoon. Crucifixion and death. We are now entering the final phase of our 24-hour timeline. It's the afternoon, and we are approaching the stark, brutal reality of the Roman execution site at Golgotha. By comparing the historical accounts in a harmony of events, we can perfectly synchronize the timing of this afternoon. The crucifixion itself begins at roughly 9 a.m. Jesus will hang on the cross for approximately 6 hours. The timeline concludes with his death right around 3 p.m., creating a window of almost unimaginable endurance. So the crucial point is understanding the clinical mechanics of this execution, and it is incredibly sobering. According to a landmark study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, death by crucifixion was a deeply calculated, multifactorial process. Step 1. Severe scourging, causing massive tissue damage and blood loss. Step 2. Hypovolemic shock, where the body's organs begin to literally shut down because of the low blood volume. And step 3, the ultimate cause of death, exhaustion, asphyxia. With their arms outstretched, the victim actually has to push up on nailed feet just to exhale. Eventually, the muscles completely give out and the victim simply cannot breathe anymore. It was a punishment meticulously designed to extract maximum pain. The Romans called it ex cruciatus, which literally translates to out of the cross. The mechanics of this execution were so horrific that an entirely new word had to be invented just to describe that supreme level of agony. And yes, that is exactly where our modern English word excruciating comes from. As exhaustion asphyxia prevents normal respiration, death finally occurs around 3 p.m. To guarantee he was dead, a Roman soldier thrust a spear into his side. Historical accounts describe a sudden flow of blood and water. Modern medicine identifies this as pleural effusion, a buildup of fluid around the lungs and heart resulting from the severe shock and asphyxia. Because the Jewish Sabbath was rapidly approaching at Friday sunset, the body was quickly taken down and laid in a nearby tomb.
Archaeological excavations actually reveal this tomb was situated in a discontinued Iron Age rock quarry that had been transformed into a garden, and so these 24 hours finally conclude in the quiet of that stone tomb.
We've moved all the way from the upper room to a stone quarry today, guided by archaeology, medicine, and history. We've looked at the rapid political maneuvering, the harsh clinical realities of hemidrosis and asphyxia, and the physical artifacts left behind by the men who orchestrated the trials. So, after reviewing all this evidence, how does mapping these specific 24 hours, hour by hour, change your understanding of this world-altering day? I really hope this structured journey has sparked your curiosity to dig even deeper into these sources. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.